Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Green, and I'll be your host for tonight's vBrownBag. We're going to be discussing IT DevOps using the vRealize Lifecycle Manager. And to present that, we have Bryan Halter. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. As always, we're a live show, and we enjoy questions and participation. So if you're watching, you can ask questions in the question box. If you are on Twitter, you can tweet the hashtag vBrownBag and I'll be watching. You can also tweet at any of our handles at vBrownBag, vBrownBag Latin, Brazil, EMC. This is the US show. We are live every Wednesday at 7:30 Central. Though we're not the only show. To get a full schedule, go to vBrownBag.com/brownbags and see what's coming up next. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Bryan. Bryan, you ready?
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for the great introduction, Tom. And if I can present, I'll jump into our material.
All right. I'm handing it over to you now.
Got it. So yeah, thanks for the introduction. Just by way of introductions, I'm Bryan Halter, Director of Engineering for the vRealize Suite Lifecycle Manager, and joining me tonight for a demo and a technical deep dive is Bhavin, one of my senior engineers. And so what we'd like to talk about tonight is IT DevOps, which is a topic that has a lot of opinions about what DevOps is, somewhere between everything and nothing. We're going to talk about where DevOps came from, how it's been applied to the software industry, how that parallels into IT, and then how VMware's vRealize Suite Lifecycle Manager helps implement that DevOps process for the vRealize suite of products. We'll talk about some of the maturity models from, the very basic things, crawl, all the way up to extremely advanced things where we integrate the Lifecycle Manager with external products like Jira to help manage the software lifecycle of all the wonderful things that vRealize can do. And then we'll cut to a demo where Bhavin will show sort of our middle of the road walk level maturity where we can manage all that content. So starting out, sort of at the beginning, talking about where software was. And we were, when I joined VMware, that was about 6 years ago. We were just fresh off of the acquisition of Dynamic Ops and what would become the Cloud Automation Center, vRealize Automation. We had a mean time to delivery for change of about 3 weeks, meaning that from the time that a developer coded up a change to the time that it was built in the product, that it had been regression tested, was about 3 weeks. That meant that that the developer didn't really know that they were off the hook for a while. As a manager, I didn't know that a story was really done for 3 weeks. It also meant that we had really low agility in terms of being able to quickly iterate on features, being able to quickly change what we were doing. That made it really hard. And so that also turns into a high bug rate because now I've built things on top of code that maybe wasn't correct. And it also led to a lot of context switching, going back and fixing things that I thought were done 2 weeks ago, but it turns out they weren't. So that's where, sort of the DevOps discipline comes into the software side. And I'll talk about how this parallels into the IT side in a minute. All the changes that you've seen in VMware being able to move towards being a more software as a service or SaaS-based business with VMC, with cloud automation services that we announced at VMworld this year, meant that we had to have a mean time to delivery of hours, not weeks. That means that we had to have a high level of automation, we had to have a high level of repeatability, and so we had to build a release process around this where I can take a change and I can have functional testing, security testing, scale and performance, resiliency testing, all baked into the pipeline, because those are the keys to delivering software from a developer into a service offering. It means being able to take every change that we have and do testing on it, decide if that should be allowed to go out to my end users, to my consumers. I needed to have operational visibility to know what had actually been checked in, what had been pushed to production versus what was still in development. And I needed to have a very low escape defect rate so that when a developer checks in a change, they have the tools in front of them to know that that change is going to be good. We have the processes in place to know that that change is going to be good and it's not going to impact our end users. And so a lot of these are the same challenges that we talk about in IT, where if I'm operating vRealize automation as a self-service portal, I need to know that all of those applications that I can deploy, that they work and they're not going to cause an escalation for my consumers. I need to know that if I'm managing vRealize operations and I build a new dashboard or I build new alerts, that those are correct and that they'll trigger at the right times. I need to know if I'm managing vCenter and I go and apply updates to a template, that template gets correctly deployed so that I'm not compromising the security posture or compromising a compliance aspect for my organization. And so that's where a lot of the principles and a lot of the techniques that we've had in the software side can be applied to the IT side. And that's where Lifecycle Manager is here to help. So talking about the vRealize suite, just to level set for folks who aren't as familiar with it, vRealize Automation and vRealize Orchestrator work together to be able to provision infrastructure, provision networks, and then customize that infrastructure and that infrastructure so that you can deploy applications easily. One of the use cases that we'll get to in a little bit when we talk about real life is we use vRealize Automation actually to deploy the vRealize suite for all of our dev test consumers, and this saves us a ton of time in the BU, and we'll get down to some real numbers later. But it allows us to automate and standardize configuration and installation of applications. It allows us to apply policy-driven placement and governance so that people are provisioning into the right clusters, people are provisioning to the right data stores without having to know the details of all of those things. And it allows me to clean up the data center and minimize waste. So one of the things that my developers are great at is they're great at provisioning stuff. They're really bad at cleaning stuff up. So we have leases and we have processes in place so that the machines that are idle get cleaned up. vRealize Operations obviously provides data center performance monitoring, and it also allows me to manage and highlight trouble spots. And I can also use it to manage individual applications and provide dashboards and charts. So those are the two domains that we're applying DevOps to, and that's why it's really important that we keep them going down the road safely and well. So are there any questions yet about what we're talking about or what we're going to get into later in the show?
Nope, we're all clear.
Cool. So taking vRealize Automation and taking operations at VMware in the CMBU, we actually use it for provisioning into 5 worldwide data centers. We have about 3,000 machines under management just in the cloud management business unit. We've got about 400 active users deploying dev test workloads, everything from deploying vCenter clusters to being able to deploy VROps clusters, VRA clusters. And so we typically do about 500 deployments a week. And so looking at the time savings, just in terms of engineers not having to go deploy all those applications themselves, it comes out to be about $15 million a year in economic impact. Then you look at what else they get done, and it's even higher. But we'll go for the little numbers here. And so service outages here are really expensive. What's worse is when they happen on weekends and you get someone who's trying to get a hot fix out, and then they end up really grumpy. So our goal is to be able to safely iterate on the automation platform, on the operations platform, be able to put out new service offerings, to be able to know that they're good for our end users. And this is something that we're taking very seriously, and we're using the Lifecycle Manager to get there. So when we start out look at, how are we deploying application stacks, right? So Lifecycle Manager started being able to manage content for VRA blueprints and VRA workflows. In LCM 1.3, we added the ability to manage vCenter templates. And in the most recent 2.0 release, now we can manage a lot of VROps content. And so taking a basic application example, we have blueprints for provisioning the infrastructure. We have workflows for customizing it. We have vCenter templates that are the basis of all of that. And then now we have vROps dashboards and alerts for all those applications that you can think of it as a single unit. I need to move from my dev environment all the way through to production to say that I have a service offering my users can consume. And so, this is where the biggest things for us are really, how do I know a change is safe, right? So we can unit test that change, which means if it's a VRA blueprint, we can look at it and say, do all the properties meet best practices? If it's a VRO workflow, we can even look at things like JSLint to say, does all the JavaScript meet requirements? We can even write tests that start to do deployments to make sure that these artifacts work as they're intended. And then what about dependencies? Well, do I need to take the whole application stack and move it to a staging environment? Do I need to do demos off of it? Do I need to coordinate the release from that dev environment and that sprint demo all the way through to the production environment? Those are all things that we'll be able to get to later with the Lifecycle Manager and say, how do we move this application? How do we move a service offering as a unit, even though it spans multiple pieces of the vRealize stack? So one thing I'd like to talk about is what are the roles and responsibilities in DevOps? So we have developers. So the developer may they may be the person building the template in vCenter. They may be the person building blueprints and workflows in VRA. They may be doing all of those things. It really kind of depends on how sophisticated the customer is and how large their team is. We've seen people who do it all. We've seen people who are very functional. We enable both models. Ultimately, they need to test their offering in their environment. They need to deliver their changes to source control, where they're whether they're developing a blueprint or a VRO workflow, it's product code. It needs to be kept to a high standard, and so they'll build tests around that. And then we have a release manager. So the release manager's job is to code review changes. It's to know what's going out in a given release. So that's knowing, what are the new capabilities, what are the bug fixes that are going out in the release, making sure that all the things that are supposed to be going to production are going, and that other things are kept out. And the release manager manages the production release and monitors for bugs and feedback. These two people you see at the bottom are personas that we've developed in VMware. Scott the developer and Shauna the DevOps admin. And you'll see them later in our slides. And we treat them very, very real. And to us, we talk about them a lot actually, and they fill a very real role in our development process. The basic workflow here, though, is in an effort to avoid stepping on each other and having conflicting changes. We're introducing a methodology called feature branch development. And so all of your workflows, all of the things that are in production would be on this master branch at any given time. And so that's where all the code that's headed towards your production environment is. And so if I'm Scott and I start working on this feature development 30, which may be a story in Jira, it may be something else that's kept during an agile sprint, I would create a branch, and that would be based off of the most recent code. And I can continue iterating on that in isolation so that no one's stepping on me and I'm not stepping on anyone else until it's done. And at the same time, I can work on another feature, and I follow the same workflow where I would branch the code. I'd be able to iterate on that. And so I might have a check-in that fails its test for some reason. I might have another check-in that fixes all of those things. And once that's green, now this code can be merged into master. And so I only have feature dev 45 going towards production. And feature dev 30, I can continue holding on to that until it's in a better state and it's ready to go. But this is one of the development workflows that we're big fans of, because it allows developers to move from an environment where you might have 5 or 10 developers all sharing a single VRO. Now, if every developer has their own individual orchestrator, they can work collaboratively and safely without causing conflicts. And so what happens here, and it's not shown in this picture, is that when Dev 30 is done, there would be a merge up to master, and the conflicts would be resolved at that point, and that's where it can be tested to make sure that the combined functionality works correctly. It's a pretty simple workflow. It's being used, and Bhavin and I actually have been working with a large drug company on their implementation of this, and they're super excited about this level of isolation that they're going to get, because it's going to allow them to scale up their development team and really offer and really enable their consumers to have a much bigger role in what are the services that are offered without having to grow out the core IT team. So they're seeing it as a force multiplier. So when we talk about bringing an application to production, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but we think of it as we start out building templates, where we provision the template, we build a customization spec, we customize the template, we install the prerequisites. Then someone else comes along and builds a blueprint. Then we decide, hey, we need to know how to monitor this. So now we go off and we build some dashboards, we build some alerts, we merge all those things to master, and that's where we do testing on our feature branch, and then merge to master, where we can merge our changes with other features. We can test on an integration system, and then we, when it's time, at the end of the sprint, at the end of a push to production, we can validate that all those bits got released to production at the right time, and they can move in lockstep. So we're talking about not just one thing, but we're talking about being able to take everything from the template and customization spec in vCenter all the way up through the workflows and packages and orchestrator that will customize it, the blueprints, property definitions, event broker subscriptions and automation, and the dashboards, alerts, metrics, views, and symptoms in operations that are necessary to know that application is functioning properly. So it's an incredibly powerful way to do this. And it's a way to do it without having to go make changes directly in production. Hope that they work. Cross your fingers, don't check in right at 5 o'clock. And then be able to sleep well at night. This is how all of our teams who are doing software as a service development are actually putting their changes into a pipeline, and it looks very similar to this, but for Java application code. So the developer workflow for Scott is to create a feature branch, develop their content, test locally, capture from their development environment into source control, and then eventually they submit a merge request to GitLab. And so that's where Scott's job ends. His code has made it to source control. He can start to work on his next task. He stays focused on the task at hand. And then Shauna is the one where Shauna picks up at that point and takes the merge requests that went into Git, runs through the lifecycle manager, can run the tests on the master branch and know if that feature branch is ready to go. Tags the captured content as release ready, and then can release to production. And if needed, the lifecycle manager gives her a very easy way to roll back those changes. So if it's a template, you can revert to the prior version without fixes or changes in it. If it's a VRO workflow or package, you can easily roll those back. If it's a dashboard or an alert in operations, you can roll those back. And so now recovery isn't a matter of having to go find a fix. You roll back and you can come back, you can reattempt the upgrade. When there's a fix in hand, it becomes, you go from having an escalation to having a very normal event that can be done as time permits.
So we do have a question.
Yeah.
Is this the product and all the outcomes that you have here, is it back-ended by a certain Git product, or is it just using generic Git in the background, or what's driving the engine here?
It's using GitLab for the time being, although we're working on integrations with GitHub and Bitbucket.
Great, thanks.
So in addition to the wins for the developer who now has a controlled way of pushing changes through to production, the service owner who knows that primarily good changes are getting to prod, and when a bad change gets there, there's a way to recover in a controlled manner. The release manager who now doesn't have 10 developers pushing whatever random changes they have into prod. Instead, now the release manager knows what's going in, can make sure that all the paperwork is done, that users are aware of the changes that are coming. They get a lot of visibility, right? So they know what's ready to be released, what's the health of the branch. They know what gets released to production, so you don't have features sneaking their way in. You know what features are still being worked on. You know who pushed a change to follow up and ask, what, why, or how, whatever. You have predictability. So if I have a feature branch that's done, I know how many feature branches are done. I know what their testing status is. I know if they're going to make it into the release. I have agility because now I don't have developers stepping on each other. I can do, very forward-looking feature work safely in isolation and keep it from bleeding through into more core functionality, shorter-term investments. I can refactor as needed, and I can roll back changes if I find out that it either shouldn't have gone, and that rollback can happen on the feature branch, it can happen before going to production, and so it can happen throughout this process. And so it's a bit more process, but it enables the team to go much faster and to develop a platform reliably for the end users and for the consumers. So we look at this as maturity is everything, right? And so we have three models that we look at, and we start with crawl. So we can use the Lifecycle Manager to manage your content. It's very simple for capturing content, testing it, and then later releasing it. We can have basic RBAC so that developers can't release into production. That has to be approved. We can have gates in the way. And those could be developers that are using a shared environment. They could also be using a dedicated environment. The next step in the model, and it's really an evolution, is taking advantage of the Git managed content. So that's where you start to introduce source control concepts. You start to introduce things like feature branches. You start to do code reviews rather than necessarily having two developers looking over each other's shoulder. It's a bit more matured process. And here again, you're using either a shared development environment or a dedicated environment. It's kind of up to you in terms of how much infrastructure you want to spin up. And then the most mature model is building additional unit tests on top of your code, and those may be unit tests for compliance. For example, if every VRA blueprint needs to incorporate certain standards, it could be looking at VRO workflows and making sure that JSLint passes. There are lots of options out there as far as what we do for unit tests. It also allows you to alter the release flow within pipelines. So I'd mentioned it earlier, but we have a large financial customer in Maryland who has done a lot of extensive work with this. And actually, as part of their release process, they make sure that the feature the developers developed has a story in their task tracker and in Jira that's in a working state. So it's not closed. It makes sure that the task exists and that it's open. And all that happens prior to the developer even trying to commit their change. And so they can automate a lot of their process, and they can also use that to push updates into other systems. And so it's really, it really becomes part of their end-to-end DevOps flow and integrates with their development environment and everything else that they're doing. So with that in mind, Bhavan's going to walk us through the walk model for this. Let me figure out how to throw the presenter to him.
All right, I think I got it over to him.
All right, perfect.
I can see you,
Yep.
Bhavan.
Go ahead, Bhavan.
You're on mute right now.
Am I audible?
Yep,
Now
hear
we
you now.
hear you, yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. As Bryan introduced, I'm Bhavin. I'm working with Bryan on the same project. So this is an LCM. I'll straight away jump on a demo because I'm looking at the watch and we have like a 30 minutes so to demo this thing. So this is like LCM. In that particular LCM, as you can see, the content management on the left-hand side. So I quickly just take 2 minutes to quickly go over all this particular thing. So this is an endpoint. So basically, as Bryan mentioned, we are supporting the vRealize suites in which we have a different product, like we have like a VRA, that vRealize automation, vRealize orchestrator. We support a vCenter server for a customized specs and a template. We have a VROps, and we use the GitLab as a source control mechanism. So you can add the endpoint from this particular point, whatever content or whatever endpoint you want to manage, you can add it from here. I'm not going into that particular detail right now. Then after second tab is a content. So whatever endpoint you have added, after adding those endpoint, you can add the content. When you are adding an endpoint, you are setting the policy. So basically we are strictly following the model for a capture, test, and release. Just keep in mind like a software development process. Developers are writing the code. That means they are producing the code. So basically we are capturing those particular code. Then after we are putting a testing around those particular code, we are testing on some server, like whatever code is written by the developer, it's intent to correct or not, or something like whatever feature he is writing, it's correct or not. That is a test phase, and last is the release. So if everything we are finding good, we are releasing that particular code either to the source control, or we are like running on some dedicated server. That's a release endpoint kind of thing. So same kind of analogy we are following here, like a capture, test, a release. So whatever endpoint you are adding here, what kind of thing you're going to do with that endpoint means endpoint is for a capture, test, or release. Now that particular content tab supports here, like, okay, yeah, you are adding the content. So when you're adding the content, you are specifying, okay, I'm capturing the content. Then after, what you want to do with that content? I want to test that content. And then after, you are specifying along with that testing, what you want to do? You want to check in that content to the source control, or you want to deploy that content to the any of the release endpoint. That kind of plan you are specifying here. So this is a, like we are calling as like a single package request, in which you are doing like you are specifying to our pipeline, like, okay, perform this operation, capture the content, test the content, and deploy the content. That's a single package request. So this is like a content pipeline. Definitely we need a pipeline to carry out the whole process kind of thing. So this is a pipeline in which, as we are following the same model, like, okay, capture, test, and release. So basically whatever you are specifying, capture from this endpoint, so that particular process is going over here. Then say suppose you are specifying like test the content, so that process will carry over, and the same thing for a release. And in a content settings, like we are specifying a few settings. One is like a source control access. So basically, if you're going to use the source control, so that particular detail you're going to specify here. Like, okay, you're going to connect to this GitLab. You're going to acquire the access token from the GitLab that you're going to provide here. That will be used here as a source control endpoint. And if you are using the vSphere template, if you're going to manage the vSphere template, so you need to provide that vSphere template repository. We are using the content library, so that specifically you need to specify over here. Now I'm directly jumping over to the content tab. So basically, one of the slide Bryan was showing, like, okay, we have like a multi-developer persona kind of thing, or like say suppose more than one developers are working on a same content, or not directly, but say suppose indirectly. So I'm just going to demo first thing that particular use case here, how we handle that use case using this our content management software. So let's drill down into this particular capture content. So basically we have like a composite blueprint. I capture that content with all the dependency. Then after I tested that content onto the test environment, everything finds good. I check in that content to our master branch. Now from the master branch I capture, so I got like a base copy. So basically if I'm a developer, I'm starting writing a code, what first thing I'll do, I'll rebase my branch. So that's why I'll be in a sync with the master and my own workspace. So same thing I did it over here. So I just base it here. If you go into the version, so just quickly show to the like audience, like, okay, so in the version we have like all the contents and we have like all the dependencies. So basically you don't have to worry about like, okay, I'm making a change here, what are the dependency for this particular content, how would I find that one, how would I map it, and if I deploy everything as an application to the my release endpoint, everything's supposed to work together. So that's the beauty of the product. Basically, we manage the whole dependency structure. So you don't have to find the dependency one by one and make those change or capture latest or release the latest version is not aligned properly. And the result is like if you're releasing on the endpoint, it's gonna be a chaos kind of thing. But we manage everything here. So let's jump over here. So this is a particular like composite blueprint. And in that composite blueprint, it has a dependency on a VRO. And that is a particular dependency. So like, let's say, suppose I'm going directly onto that server. This is a VRO, is a part of that blueprint dependency. I'm changing here. So now developer is making a change. Now developer is not aware other developer, like other developer is also working on a same content, but it has like an indirect dependency. So this is like a dependency. So developer one made a change and it's going and say suppose capturing that content from the server. Here you can specify the tag, like, okay, that tag will be used to release the multiple contents in a same sort, like in a single release. As soon as you say capture, the pipeline will be invoked, and you can see here the pipeline. So pipeline will start capturing the content and import artifacts into the local repo, and that new version will be available. Meanwhile, I can show you like, okay, this is like a GitLab and this is the repo I created. So basically we have like a Blackstone group and SDT project. And under that one, now we are working on a multi-dev branch. As Bryan mentioned, like we are working like a feature development branch kind of thing. So that's why like you can create a multiple branches, and those branches you can add as an endpoint into the LCM. So if you see the endpoint here, So I have like a dev SCM. This is a name, whatever you can assign. If you open that particular one, so you can see like, okay, repository is like a Blackstone/SDDC test, and the branch is multi-dev branch. And you can see the one more GitLab endpoint, that is a master branch. So basically that's a particular flow. Developers are developing the content. They are checking everything to the master branch. Everything looks good. Release manager will merge those particular code into their own branch. And then after, release manager will check out the code from that branch into the LCM. Then after, they can test the content onto any of the test endpoint. And if they find okay, they can release that content to the master branch. So that's a flow we are trying to make it here. So now content has been captured successfully. So this is the version 12 we capture. Now I'm going to check in that content to the source control. Same way, like a new pipeline will be triggered. So now here, like we already captured. So capture stage will be skipped. Test is also skipped, and it will directly run the release stage. And a release stage is like a either check-in or releasing to the endpoint. Here we are making a check-in to the source control. So as you can see, like as we made a check-in, you can see the review request over here. So now release manager can go ahead and review the code and see whether this code is allowed to check in or not. So here, yeah, so here you can see the change, like same update here by dev 2, updates made by dev 1. So this is the change. Okay, as a release manager, I'm allowing this change. I'm merging into the multi-dev branch. Now developer 2 comes in, and developer 2 also making a change onto the same line. This is a basic, like a merge conflict scenario kind of thing. But developer 2 is not aware, like, okay, developer 1 already made a change on that same workflow, because developer 2 is working on this blueprint, and as a part of that blueprint, it's making a change on that particular workflow. So developer 1 will come, 2 will come here at its place, and it will capture the content from the library, and that will be a part of the dependency. So basically here is like a developer made a change which is not a direct conflict, but it's an indirect way. It's going to be a conflict to the developer too. Same process, like a new pipeline will be invoked, and it will run the capture from the endpoint. This one will take a little bit more time than last one, because it's basically the last capture we made just for a VRO workflow. That's like a lower object, but here we are capturing everything from the parent with all the dependencies. So that is gonna capture here, and that will be a version 10. So just like bear in mind, like, okay, I capture from both the different particular content. One I capture as a VRO workflow, which developer made the changes, and now I'm capturing the composite blueprint, which has a dependency on the same VRO, which developer 2 made the changes. Now, while it's getting captured, let's go on a, so I'm just a little bit doing a sidetrack, utilizing the time here. So basically, like as Bryan mentioned, we support the various like vRealize suites products, and a part of that particular one, we have like a vRops, as well as we have like a vSphere template also. So basically, you can also use the LCM tool for the versioning of the template, and we use a content library to store that whole template onto the vCenter itself. So that's where it's very lightweight kind of thing. It's not gonna like consume the disk space on a local storage kind of thing. Everything on a vCenter, and content library will sync those particular library and move the content around. So if you see here on a content, we have like a template. So basically it's been captured on version 1, and you can deploy and same kind of process, and you can check in that template into the source control, and you can source control that way also. Let me check. So it's still capturing. Same way, like if I do capture, you can mark this production ready. So this is like another thing. So this is like a production ready tab kind of thing. If you select this option, that means the content is marked as a production ready. So whatever endpoint you added, if you mark that endpoint as a release endpoint, so that's the strategy we follow. Only production ready content will be released on the release endpoint. So that's where we are saving the production endpoint. And we are having a strict guidelines for a developer and the release manager. So we basically follow that basic persona, like, okay, I'm a release manager, so I should have like all this privilege in order to protect my production environment, as well as I have to provide the guideline to the developer. Developer should follow this guideline, which developer can't alter. As for example, you are adding an endpoint, and as an endpoint for a GitLab, one of the policy you are setting is like a code review. So as we had seen, as we check in the code, the merge request is getting generated because like we enable the code review. If suppose like a release manager is setting that policy, so developer can't change it. So basically developer is following that strict guidelines.
And so, Bhavin, in all of this allows me to move more smaller changes to prod, right? I don't need to necessarily do a 2-week release. I could even move content through to prod as soon as it's ready.
Yes, and that's remind us like whatever we worked on that final case, like actually they have like a release model weekly basis kind of thing. So basically they make a small changes, and they follow the 1 week of a release process kind of thing. Every Tuesday they release their work kind of thing. So it's very useful for them to like a developer works on their own branches kind of thing at the end of that particular sprint, whatever they call, and they check out those content, and then after they review the content or test on the QA environment, if everything looks good, they release to the production. So here, so we capture for the dev 2. Now dev 2 is also using the same branch. Now include all dependency, dev 2 content, and check in. So already we merged dev 1 content. Now dev 2 content is coming on the way, but our LCM is still not like if you remember, I started the conversation with this particular point, like this is my rebase. So my LCM is not synced with that particular LCM. So whatever check-in I'm gonna make, that's gonna produce the merge conflict. Okay, so basically whatever change I have made, it was like resolved by the GitLab itself. That's why it didn't produce the merge conflict. But say suppose
So as we're waiting on that, a question of if there is
Yes.
this merge conflict, or if there's something going on with like what we're looking through here, how do we push it back into the environment? So I'm guessing we're going to see that here, but I just wanted to make sure that we looked
Yes.
at it.
So basically here is like actually options like we are having. So once you see the merge conflict here, GitLab is allowing to resolve the merge conflict in place. So you can resolve the merge conflict and you can commit the change in the GitLab. And then after you can do the reverse process, you can check out that code from the GitLab to LCM and push it to the environment. Other thing is like actually we are having, so if you see, we are storing like a hash code. This is a SHA code for the commit. So this is the last commit we are having. So my LCM is sync with this particular SHA commit. And we allowing like within that package, we have like all the files. So all the files are also having the same SHA commit. But if suppose one of the file has a conflict, so we can explicitly check out that file and check into the instance. So that's way we can manage that SHA commit with that merge conflict. And developer or whoever is responsible to resolve that conflict will go ahead and make that relevant changes. And again, check out the file or capture the file from the instance and check into the source control. So basically there are two options kind of thing. Let me explain. So basically one option is here. You can resolve in place and you can commit the same changes here in a GitLab. So GitLab will be in a sync or it will be like a conflict resolve. And then after you can capture it to the LCM. And the second option is like, okay, whatever file has a conflict, you can check out that specific file into the LCM. So that's where you can manipulate the SHA for that particular file. And you can check in, release that file to the instance and make a comparison by looking at the LCM also. Like, okay, what other changes have been made? Does it answer the question?
Yep. Thank you.
The good news in all of this is that we're really getting down to an infrastructure as code operating model for products that weren't necessarily built around it. And so everything that you see ends up being text, and you can resolve it through either through GitLab, or if you need to pull it down, you can do that.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting features around being able to pull out the information from the existing endpoints like VRA, and
Right.
being able to just have that and work with it, which isn't easy or even, I don't know, possible without a product like this.
Absolutely. And actually, other thing is like actually, so like say suppose this is a version I capture, and if suppose you want to see that one, so here you can see the content as well. Like you can just click any of the file, it will download the file, and you can view the content here also. Like, okay, you don't have to necessarily go into the instance and look around kind of thing. And as Bryan mentioned earlier in one of his slides, it's like a rollback feature. So basically here you can see, so here is a thing, let me explain here. So this is we capture the first copy from the production. Okay, this is my good copy. That particular thing I deployed onto the developer instances. So basically, okay, developers are like getting a production copy, and on top of that, they are putting their own feature. Then after as they keep developing, we capture from that developer instance. So this is like a third version we capture from the developer 2. That particular version, we check into the source control, and from the source control, developer 1 also check in, developer 2 also check in. Now we again check out the code from the source control, that is at version 4. So this version 4, we are saying like, okay, it has a developer 1 and developer 2 content. Now first what I will do, I'll test the content. So I'll test that content using the test. So basically we test the content as well. So you can specify like, okay, test on this particular instance. You can deploy the content while testing, or you can skip that one, run the unit test, and you can run those unit tests on either we have like embedded VRO, which comes with all the basic unit tests, or you can extend those unit tests by bringing your own VRO. So this is an external VRO, and you can test the content. So it will kick off the unit test and run all the unit tests, and you will see the result. And it will be tested. So once the content has been tested, you can again capture and you can mark the content as a production ready. Like I verified the content, I tested the content, everything looks good. I'm marking this as a production ready content, and you can check in this content into the master branch. From the master branch, you can again capture and you can deploy onto the production environment. So that is the way you can harness all those particular things.
So Bhavin, can you swing back to the content page though?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and go into the different versions of one of the blueprints. So one of the interesting parts here is that we can add tags now to them, and we can mark certain versions as production ready. We can mark them as part of a bigger application. And one of the features we introduced in LCM 2.0 is the ability to select multiple pieces of content by their tag and release them all at once. And so now we're not dealing with a single application, we're dealing with the platform as a whole.
Yep. So basically, like whatever Bryan says, like, so you can search those things like a production ready content, and you can see like here is only this thing, but say suppose like you are selecting VRA, VRO, VROps content. And say suppose you are like a club those particular thing. And you can bring all those different content together and you can do the deploy all together kind of thing. So you don't have to go and pick the content one after another and release it. You can release all together kind of thing.
Right, and now you get very good traceability and you can inventory exactly what's going into prod for this release.
And here is like other thing is like we have like a pipeline, and this is like other pipelines are coming out of the box kind of thing, and you can extend those pipeline in order to apply some gating rule kind of thing. So basically you don't want to release the content before you release or you test that content onto the QE environment. So basically we put a like a gating rule into the like a pre-release cycle. So basically pre-release stage is nothing but like when the releasing content is performing, before that it will check whether the same content has been released to the QE environment. If it is not, then it will fail the pipeline, and basically it will prevent somebody to release the without testing the content to the production endpoint. So that's where like you can put a more strictness towards like process kind of thing, and you can guard your production endpoint as well as you follow the agile process kind of thing. Like, okay, you develop, you test it, and then after you release it, otherwise not. Same thing like if you wanted to prevent somebody to capture from the production endpoint directly, you can have like this pipeline pre-capture, you can allow them to put a certain rules kind of thing. Don't allow to capture the test without notifying me, and release manager or administrator will come and unblock the pipeline and allow them capturing. And so I'm just showing like, okay, if you open this pipeline, like this is like a validating capture. So basically you can like enhance or extend this pipeline by having a user operation. And I'm just specifying, okay, notify me whenever somebody is capturing from production environment for a VRA, prod VRA, and email me on my email address. So I'll get an email and I'll come here and I'll unblock the pipeline kind of thing. Like, so suppose somebody is capturing. So for that one, sorry, you have to go and you have to enable this pipeline. So as a part of the execution, I kept, sorry, pre-capture. So as you can see, like the pre-capture pipeline will be invoked, and it will now waiting for a approval kind of thing. And as you can, there will be an email pretty soon out kind of thing. It will send an email to my email address, and as soon as I receive the email, I can come here and I can approve it. Once I approve it, so here is an email kind of thing, like, okay, capture requested for this particular content from this prod VRA. Once I approve it, it will say like, okay, operation is completed. So pre-capture is done, and now it will allow somebody to capture the content. So it's like a lot of like way you can extend this pipeline. You can allow the gating rule. You can prevent some content to be captured. You can prevent production to be bombarded with some unwanted content which are not being tested on any of the test environment or something like that. Or you can just allow certain content which are marked with certain tags only, those kind of thing. And you can allow restriction on the developers by having like, okay, developer can't mark any content as a production ready. So if they can't mark as a content production ready, that means they can't release the content onto the production endpoint. So these are the particular strategy you can set it. So is there any question?
That was pretty straightforward. There are some questions about the architecture overall of the environment. So the question was, if I buy Lifecycle Manager, what do I actually get, and what do I have to have a GitLab server deployed outside of this, or is GitLab a part of the virtual appliance?
No, GitLab is outside of that virtual appliance. So you have to set up. Sorry, Bryan.
No, I was just going to jump in and say that, so the vRealize Suite Lifecycle Manager it comes with your vRealize Suite license, and we have customers today who are using it with GitLab CE, the community edition.
Awesome. Yeah. So another question did come in: can it be used free GitLab? And the answer to that is obviously yes.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
There are other goodies if you pay for GitLab, but
yeah, no, GitLab's really powerful. We've had a few recent videos on that. So a lot of times people want to know the guts of, if I buy it or if I download a trial, what am I getting? So it's always good to ask those questions.
Yes.
All right. There's no other questions coming in. So do you guys want to plug how people can get a hold of you?
Yeah.
to ask
you make me the
questions.
presenter again? I actually have a slide for that.
There you go.
So the best ways to get a hold of us, so Twitter, you can just DM Pilot Bryan, and I'll help you get hooked up with the right people. The other thing is, we have a VMware community for the Suite Lifecycle Manager. It's relatively new, so it hasn't gotten a ton of traction yet, but it's a great way to engage with throughout the organization with other people who are implementing it. And it gives us a good sense of where people are and is a good way to get to know how you're trying to use the product.
Is there trial licensing available on any sign-up page, or is it assumed you'll have the full suite?
If you have a suite license, you can just download it from the normal entitlement download page. So it's a single appliance. You deploy it with either 2 or 4 CPUs. If you want to use the content management features, 4 vCPUs are required. If you want to use it just to do sort of the traditional suite lifecycle operations like install, upgrade, patch, and manage certificates, you can do it with 2 CPUs.
All right, great. Well, thank you guys very much. Is really eye-opening and cool to see all the DevOps processes that VMware is putting in to help get to that infrastructure as code vision.
Great, and we're doing a TAM deep dive session for Barcelona on IT DevOps as well. So if folks out there have customers or they're interested in doing it, in finding out more and meeting us, we'll be there on Wednesday.
Great. We'll definitely be on the lookout for that. So thank you guys for joining us again, and I hope to see everyone back next week for another episode of vBrownBag. Bye.